All right, guys. So, mad scientist looking dude slash Joy Reid's friend who always says controversial stuff, Elie Mystal has now come up with this new controversial thing that he wants to say in order to sell a book, okay? In which he's now advocating to throw out the Constitution because apparently the Constitution isn't inclusive enough according to him. And he's been going on these television shows and basically making an argument that it needs to be thrown out for various reasons that, in my opinion, really don't make sense. But hey, you know, this is what this guy is saying. So let's actually take a look at a few clips of him trying to sell this book and his argument for throwing out the Constitution.
Or throwing out the Constitution? Should the Constitution be thrown out? What do we do? Is it a living document? Is it a sacred document?
It's certainly not sacred. All right, let's start there. The Constitution is kind of trash. Now, let's just talk as adults for a second.
What did you say? It's what?
It's kind of trash.
Trash.
It was written by slavers and colonists and white people who were willing to make deals with slavers and colonists. They didn't ask anybody who looked like me what they thought about the Constitution. They didn't say, oh, Jim, come over here. What do you think about this old Constitution? Well, massa, I sure don't like how you sell my children. But I gotta say, massa, this King George, he needs to be stopped. My grandpapa used to say, ain't no taxation without representation for massa. Like, that's not what happened, right? This document was written without the consent of black and brown people in this country and without the consent of women in this country. And I say if that is the starting point, the very least we can do is ignore what those slavers and colonists and misogynists thought and interpret the Constitution in a way that makes sense for our modern world. That's the starting line.
Do you want to rewrite it?
I could, right? I could rewrite parts of it in a tweet.
Now, in your book, Allow Me to Retort, you reframe politics and the Constitution by kind of breaking down how it all impacts voting rights, like you mentioned, LGBTQ rights, abortion rights. The list, as you know, goes on and on. So are you arguing that the Constitution needs to be scrapped altogether?
Sure, but I don't think that's going to happen. Like, if we could throw that out and start over with a new document that was more inclusive of everybody, that was written by everybody, at no point have black people, brown people, or women had a say in actually writing the Constitution or the amendments to that Constitution. If we could throw that out and have a delegation of all Americans to write a new one, I would be all for that. Okay. That's what they did in South Africa. You know, when they got rid of apartheid, they didn't tack some amendments onto their apartheid constitution. They threw the apartheid constitution out and they started over. Yeah. I don't think that's going to happen here. And so instead of that, what I'm really advocating for is that we interpret our Constitution so that we extend justice and fairness and equality to all, as opposed to whatever the heck we do now.
All right, guys. So everybody should know that the Constitution of the United States is remarkably resilient, okay? It is the world's oldest written constitution for a reason, because it has ensured America's economic prosperity, political stability, and democratic debate, okay? It really is one of the greatest documents ever written, okay? And that is for a reason. And that in and of itself should automatically destroy this guy's credibility, because he called the Constitution trash, right? He said, throw out the whole thing and write a new one. Okay, he didn't say that, hey, we need to debate certain aspects of the Constitution, right? For example, and these are just examples, okay? This is just examples of things that are commonly debated today, right? Maybe we don't need the electoral college system. Maybe the president should be elected via popular vote. Maybe we need term limits for Congress. Maybe we need to rein in presidential power. Maybe we need to be more explicit about when and how a president can be impeached, right? For example, there was debate about whether or not it's constitutionally allowed for President Trump to be impeached after he leaves office. Okay, that was actually a real debate about that. And again, there's questions about whether or not that's actually constitutional, whether or not that's actually allowed, right? So I guess what I'm saying is that, yes, there are certain parts of the Constitution that can be clarified, that can be more explicit, or that can be debated, that are legitimate, okay? That are legitimate. However, what this guy is saying in regards to, well, the Constitution is trash because it wasn't written by black and brown people and LGBTQ and all these other groups of people, is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous, okay? Because the basis of the Constitution was written so that, one, there are multiple ways of interpreting certain things that are in the Constitution, certain things that are said, and we're going to talk about it in a few minutes. And then 2, so that it could be amended over time. And this is why slavery was abolished, right? The thing that this guy complains about so much, like, oh my God, the founders were slave owners, and it's so bad that the founders didn't outlaw slavery from the get-go. And it's like, bruh, again, this is why we have an amendment process. Because again, not all the founders were necessarily pro-slavery. Okay, a lot of them did have slaves, but some of them, went back and forth morally about whether or not it was just, right? There's a reason why Washington, upon his death, was like, hey, you got to release my slaves. Now, even though he couldn't release all the slaves, particularly those that were from his wife's first marriage, he did that, okay? And he wasn't the only founder that had those type of moral reservations about slavery, but still owned slaves anyways. Owning slaves was just something that wealthy white men during the time, and also there were black people that owned slaves too in America, right, back then as well too. Let's not forget that. That's just something that was common among people that had wealth and status. They owned slaves. That's a part of how they built their wealth. Again, everybody knows by today's standards that that was wrong, but back then it wasn't. They had different moral standards. Okay? We cannot judge people in the past by today's moral standards, because again, those guys weren't the only people that owned slaves. Slavery was cool in Africa. It was cool in the Middle East. It was cool in Eastern Europe. It was cool all around the world. Okay? It was cool all around the world. Slavery has been around for millennia, right? Slavery is not something that was invented by the evil white man that founded America. That's what you would believe if you listen to these guys and their narrative. Again, this is why what they say when they talk about, well, the founding fathers were white men that owned slaves, and therefore that makes the Constitution illegitimate. It is flawed by definition because of that. That's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. These guys, even though they owned slaves, knew that, hey, you know what? Maybe in 100 years or so, maybe 200 years or so, this might not necessarily be okay, right? This is why we're going to allow this document that we're writing to be amended. Right? This is why we're going to leave our document that we're writing to be open for interpretation. And there are some things that are pretty clear, right? And then there's some things that, again, are more vague, that are more open for interpretation. And it's vague for a reason. And that is the beauty of the Constitution. That's why it stood the test of time, right? Because of that, right? The founders knew that, hey, we don't know everything, okay? People in the future, they might want to outlaw slavery. So let's, put a mechanism in here so that they can do that if they want to do that. This is why these guys was geniuses. They were ahead of their time. But again, the amendment process is there because the founders were smart enough to understand that this country will evolve over time, and what the people want will evolve over time. Again, this is why we have the amendment process, okay? That abolished slavery with the 13th Amendment. Unless you're in prison, right? Then slave labor is fine. And that is explicit in the 13th Amendment. But I'm just saying, right? This is why we have the amendment process. Okay. Now, again, is that process perfect? No, that's not perfect. And I'll give you an example of why it's not perfect. When it comes to the 14th Amendment, it's interpretation. Okay. Separate but equal was constitutional, right? Plessy versus Ferguson said, hey, separate but equal is constitutional. Okay. And that was a way to maintain segregation in the South. Okay. In schools and public institutions, stuff like that. Then later on, in Brown versus Board of Education, that was overturned. Right? Separate but equal was no longer constitutional. And that's why you have the Supreme Court, which is laid out in the Constitution. So look, is the Constitution perfect? No. But you got to understand that the Declaration of Independence, okay, which basically set forth the ideas and the principles for a fair and just government, okay? The Constitution outlines how this government would function. Okay, and in the Declaration of Independence, the line that all men are created equal has been the basis for a lot of the amendments and changes to the Constitution over time. Okay, that is what we're striving for. And that is how America has made the progress that it's made. Okay, this is why America has become the greatest country in the world. Okay, it's through this idea that all men are created equal. And we're going to try to continue to work to make that happen. Again, this is why you have the amendment process in the Constitution, okay? This is why the Constitution has survived so long, has been one of the most successful founding documents ever, okay? Now, this guy, I don't know what type of constitution he would want. I don't know. What does it mean to have an inclusive constitution? What does that mean? Okay, because it sounds to me like this guy wants rights and privileges for certain groups of people. Like, he sounds to me like this guy was writing his own constitution. He would have an explicit right to abortion, right? Sounds to me like this guy was writing a constitution for LGBTQ people or whatever. Would he have an explicit right to castrate your children? Okay, for children to have access to sex change operations, which is what the Democrats want. Okay, would black people have a constitutional right to affirmative action? Okay, like what exactly would you want that would make the Constitution more inclusive than it already is? Because I feel like the Constitution is already pretty inclusive. Okay, it is very inclusive. But see, the problem is these guys, like I've made the argument before in the past, they simply want to tear down this country, right? They want to rip up the foundation of this country, get rid of everything that has led this country to be the great country that it is, that has led this guy for all the silly things that he says to make a good living and to get on TV saying the crazy things that he says, right? Because of the foundation of this country and the rights and privileges that are extended to people in this country. That's the only reason he can do it. Because in certain other countries, right, that don't have a constitution that's as great as ours or that acknowledges the rights and privileges that ours does, him saying that he would rip up the founding document that is trash, he might do jail time for that, right? Because they don't necessarily have a right to freedom of speech. Look at what's happened over there in Russia. If you speak out against the war in Ukraine, they can jail you for it, okay? So again, please tell me, how do you want to make this more inclusive? How can you make it more inclusive? Again, he wants special rights and privileges for people based off race, sex, and gender. And I can only imagine how discriminatory his constitution would be against white people, okay? You can only imagine the stuff that he would put in there. So again, I'm very curious as to what this guy's ideal constitution would look like, because I guarantee you it would not hold up the test of time. Right? I guarantee you whatever country this guy was founding and whatever founding documents this guy was writing, that document damn sure wouldn't survive as long as the Constitution has survived. Okay? It wouldn't. Whatever country this dude is founding will always be on the brink of civil war, because I am sure this guy would just discriminate against certain groups of people. Right? All men are probably not created equal in this guy's view. Okay, but hey, at the end of the day, you got to say controversial stuff to sell books, right? That is what this guy has to do, because otherwise nobody would give a damn about what he has to say. Nobody give a damn about what he has to say. He just should thank God and also thank the founders as well too, that he lives in a country like this, that has a constitution that allows him to say stuff like this, that he wants to trash the founding document and not do jail time for it. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.